So, May 9th in Russia, the day they marked the end of World War II. But something's shifting in how the Kremlin talks about it.
Definitely. And it's a pretty significant shift.
Right. So this deep dive, we're really zeroing in on that, how Russia is, well, actively rewriting this history. We want to look at the narratives they're pushing and, crucially, why it matters right now, with the ongoing war against Ukraine.
Exactly. And we've been looking closely at the latest EUvsDisinfo reports, specifically covering late April 28th, up to May 11th, 2025.
Yeah, trying to boil it down for you, get the essential insights without getting lost in the weeds.
The mission really is to understand this historical revisionism around May 9th, what the Kremlin's up to, and what it actually means today.
Looking at state narratives, online stuff, how it stacks up against, well, actual history.
Precisely. These reports give us a really valuable snapshot of how they're shaping the information space around this very symbolic date. It's clearly a deliberate effort.
Okay, so let's unpack this. One term that keeps coming up in the reports is Putin's History 3.0. Can you kind of walk us through the evolution here? What makes this latest version different?
Sure. It's quite the transformation if you look back. Version 1.0, maybe early 2000s, it still largely acknowledged the Soviet Union as part of the Allied effort.
Right, there was some recognition of the U.S., the U.K.
Yeah, some acknowledgement of Lend-Lease, for instance. And, resistance in occupied Europe wasn't totally ignored. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact wasn't exactly celebrated, but it wasn't front and center either.
Then came the 2010s. Version 2.0.
Right. History 2.0, that's when the emphasis started shifting, especially after Crimea in 2014. More focus on the USSR bearing the brunt, fighting almost alone, and Stalin's image started getting a bit of a polish.
Okay, so what defines 3.0, the current one? What's the key takeaway?
Well, Putin's History 3.0, which has really solidified recently, it's pretty stark. First, there's this almost complete erasure of Ukraine's role.
Erasing Ukraine. Despite, 6 million Ukrainians fighting Nazism, and Ukraine being a major battleground.
Exactly. 6 million, just deleted from the official Russian story. Second, and this is really pushed hard now, is the claim that occupied European nations mostly, collaborated with Hitler.
And the EUvsDisinfo reports give specific examples of this, right?
Yeah.
From the Russian Foreign Ministry.
They do. Really quite striking examples. Questioning if France was even a real victor, denying Poland was a victim.
Denying victimhood.
Yes, and accusing the Baltic states of actively siding with the Nazis. It just ignores the complexity, the resistance, the immense suffering.
And what about Allied support? Lend-Lease.
That's the third point. It's seriously downplayed or even denied now, even though Stalin himself admitted how crucial it was back then. And things like that joint Nazi-Soviet parade in Brest in '39, gone. Vanished from public memory.
So the shift is really towards Russia as the sole righteous victor against basically everyone else.
Pretty much. Russia standing alone against historical and supposedly modern Nazism.
Which brings us to Victory Day itself, May 9th. The analysis calls it a disinformation bonanza.
Ah, that sounds intense.
It is, because it signifies they're actively weaponizing the memory of the war. It's being used, quite cynically, to justify the current war in Ukraine.
Ow. By drawing parallels.
By falsely painting Ukraine as some kind of Nazi state and claiming the EU supports this Nazism. It's pure gaslighting, really, designed to legitimize their own aggression and at the same time discredit Europe.
So twisting the memory of fighting actual Nazis to justify
their invasion today and claiming moral superiority based on that twisted history. It lets them dismiss the actual history, like those 6 million Ukrainians who fought against Hitler.
And anyone opposing Russia now gets labeled
A Nazi.
Yeah.
It's a classic dehumanization tactic. The reports show Kremlin media, like Izvestia, pushing this absurd idea that modern Europe is a reincarnation of Nazism.
These things like crude caricatures, vulgar language.
Exactly, equating the EU with Nazi Germany. As even Krestev pointed out, it dangerously trivializes what Nazism actually was. And we see this reflected in who shows up for the Moscow parade, don't we? 2005 had loads of world leaders.
Yeah.
2025.
Yeah, a stark contrast. The guest list for 2025 is expected to be much, much smaller. The 2005 State Victory Day website even featured that family photo of leaders on its front page. Huge difference.
And meanwhile, commemorations happen elsewhere. Kiev marks the end of the war on May 8th now.
Right, May 8th, the day Nazi Germany actually surrendered. It aligns Ukraine with the broader European practice and really underscores the divergence, the split in memory. It highlights Russia's isolation on this.
Let's talk about the Immortal Regiment. It started very differently, didn't it, as a genuine grassroots thing?
Oh, absolutely. It began as a really powerful personal initiative, people carrying photos of their own relatives who fought in World War II, a genuine expression of memory.
But the reports say the state basically took it over, co-opted it.
That's the key point. The Kremlin saw its potential. They recognized it as this potent tool for, building national unity around their preferred narrative.
The narrative that emphasizes Russia's role above all others.
Precisely, emphasizing Russia's singular, decisive role while downplaying others, especially Ukrainian sacrifices. So the state stepped in, managed it, shaped it.
So it went from personal remembrance to state spectacle.
Exactly. It became a way to build this sort of cult around the great victory and link that victory directly to loyalty to the current state, the current leader. Putin marching in it really cemented that.
There were even reports of people being forced to participate sometimes.
Yes, credible reports of forced participation, making the crowds look bigger, more unified. It really shows how a genuine act of remembrance got instrumentalized, weaponized even, for political goals.
But then the big marches were canceled in 2023, 2024. Why?
Well, officially, they cited security concerns. But the strong suspicion, widely reported, was that they worried it might draw attention to the current war casualties in Ukraine.
Which would clash with the official narrative of the special military operation.
Right. Seeing potentially grieving families or pictures of soldiers recently killed in Ukraine marching, that wouldn't fit the triumphant story they wanted to tell.
But now, for 2025, the reports say large marches are planned again, with a specific instruction.
Yes, and this is really crucial. The directive is explicit. Organizers must draw a direct parallel between the special military operation in Ukraine and the Great Patriotic War.
So blending World War II commemoration with the current war.
Seamlessly blending them. Celebrating so-called new heroes from Ukraine alongside World War II veterans or their memory, it's a very clear attempt to mobilize support for the ongoing war, trying to wrap it in the glory of the past.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the myth of Russian invincibility. How does rewriting World War II history feed into that?
Well, if you create this narrative where Russia single-handedly defeated the ultimate evil, Nazism, against all odds, it helps build this myth that Russia is fundamentally unbeatable.
Implying that resistance is futile.
Exactly. It carries that implicit threat, and you see it in their negotiating style, too. Demand the maximum, never back down, project strength based on this supposed invincibility.
And it serves a wider purpose, projecting Russia as a superpower.
Absolutely. Trying to position Russia alongside the U.S. and China, often by deliberately blurring the lines between today's Russia and the Soviet Union's historical power.
But history doesn't quite back up this idea of unbroken success, does it?
Not at all. I mean, look at the Crimean War, the Russo-Japanese War, World War I, Afghanistan, the First Chechen War. There are significant defeats and setbacks throughout Russian and Soviet history.
And Ukraine's resistance now.
That's a very powerful, very contemporary challenge to that myth, isn't it? Which might be why we see so much nuclear rhetoric.
The nuclear saber rattling, displaying missiles at the parade.
Yes, it helps prop up the facade of invincibility when the conventional military narrative is under pressure. Exploiting nuclear fears is part of maintaining that image.
So pulling it all together from these EUvsDisinfo reports covering just these last couple of weeks, we're seeing a really concerted, ongoing effort by the Kremlin to rewrite history.
Yes, a deliberate campaign. It erases others, especially Ukraine. It inflates Russia's role. It falsely paints modern Europe as Nazis. It mobilizes support for the current war. And it pushes this dangerous myth of invincibility.
And it's crucial to remember, as the reports highlight, this isn't just dusty history books. It's an active tool being used now.
Right now, to shape perceptions, justify actions, and influence geopolitical outcomes.
So maybe the final thought for you, listening, is to consider the deeper impact. When such a huge, shared historical event like World War II is manipulated like this, what does it do?
Yeah, what happens when a dominant story is built on erasing others, on outright falsehoods? What does that mean for understanding the conflict today and for any hope of, long-term stability or reconciliation in the future? What are the costs of letting history be manipulated so blatantly? Something to think about.